Okay. So, as chair, I'd like to ask Brother Rosario a question. So, Brother Leader Bandaka explains that in all of Fidel's glory, in actual fact, he did want to partner with the enemy. And I'd like you specifically to deal with the point where he went to the USA, was effectively snubbed, and then decided to confiscate US property, and then that's when the embargo on Cuba happened. What's your position on that? Was that true?
Oh, that's an easy one to deal with, that one. The situation, yeah, the logic of the situation is that Cuba's had a revolution, or wanted to have a revolution, in '59. The world was in the midst of a massive Cold War. It makes no sense for a small island off the coast of America to declare war with them, a nuclear nation. There's madness. So of course you have to reach your hand out and say, let's try and do a deal, okay? Knowing that they're the devil that you're talking to. And all industry in Cuba was made by Americans. So all the tractors, all the machinery, everything was American basically owned. So it was a real problem as soon as they went with the Soviet Union. Che was actually the one who went to America and he met with Nixon. And it's a lesson for all of us. This is why I didn't agree with Nkrumah on his yeah, it wasn't the non-aligned. It was he called it, what was his? I forgot what he called his position. He was neutral between East and West in a sense.
That's not aligned. That's not aligned.
Yeah, they called it non-aligned, but it was further than that. He went further than that because even the non-aligned movement was still aligned. But yeah, there was a confusion around that, in my opinion, because your enemy knows your position, whether you state it or not. So if you're for your people, you don't need to say you're socialist or you're Pan-Africanist or you're whatever, they just know. So after Nixon met with Che Guevara, he said, I think he's a communist. Even though he never mentioned the word communism or socialism, but of course he wanted to redistribute. So to me that was a straightforward question. I don't think they had any intention of having a political relationship with America. It was just tactical. And going to the Soviet Union was forced, their position was forced, I agree. I think their hands were forced, that they couldn't be non-aligned. There's no way Cuba could be non-aligned so close, because they'll get invaded, get attacked. So they had to be supported by the Soviet Union at that time, in my opinion anyway. And that's why they went to the Soviet Union to get support, because America was trying to bankrupt them, which we see with the sanctions. So I don't think they had a choice but to work with the Soviet Union at that time.
Okay, thanks. Going to ask a question for the no-sayers. Do you think that your position is idealistic in the sense that we speak about a victory for our people? What does a victory look like? Asari has outlined several areas: health, education, employment, infrastructure, practical things that our people need. And one of the points that Asari raised is that who else during that time was able to provide this? He mentioned South Africa having massive wealth. He mentioned Nigeria having massive wealth. But when it came down to the crux of it, what comparable person can we look to? So I've kind of said it in a very long-winded way, but effectively, what is victory for African people? What does that look like? And if somebody has demonstrated this, why are we so anti it?
Good question, good question.
Right, okay, yeah, this is a very good question. And it's a difficult one. Victory for me, I would say, is that we control our own destinies. We control how we choose to be, how we choose to govern ourselves, our economic systems, etc., etc. And it is true, of course, that Cuba has supported many African countries. They've given a lot of support. I mean, in the Caribbean, many of our doctors are trained by going to Cuba. In a way, they get support. The literacy rates, I mean, all the positive things that have happened in Cuba are in no way to be taken away. However, they haven't really happened in the greatest sense specifically for people of African heritage. I mean, they've happened in Cuba for Cubans, and I think the point that Brother Van Dacker made about the fact that Castro spoke about him only seeing one group of people, Cubans, that is what's happened. So these gains have happened for Cubans, but within the context of you as a Cuban, if you are a melanated Cuban, if you're a Cuban of African heritage, if you're an African Cuban, then your position is lesser. And that is clear, and that's evidenced by the racism, by the fact that people don't even identify themselves as Africans. So even within gains, there's a bar which Africans are not rising above. And that cannot be a victory, a full victory. It can be an advancement, I think was one of the words. It can be positive, it can be a good thing, but it's not a victory. A victory is where you are victorious. You get everything that you want. It's like winning all the battles in the war. So that, to win the entire war and be victorious, as opposed to win one battle, but you haven't won the war. And that's the difference. I think that the issue about a model of where we look to, that's a very interesting one, because from what I can see historically, wherever an African leader has emerged, so we have Cabal, we have Lumumba, we have Sankara, Nkrumah, wherever we've seen positivity, we've seen a movement with an African leader, that's been taken away. They've been assassinated, they've been removed, they've never actually been allowed to survive. And we need to remember that. No positive African leader in the 20th century has been allowed to live. They've actually all been killed. So we've not been allowed to see what Lumumba would have done. What would Congo be now under Lumumba? What would Ghana have been had Nkrumah stayed there? What would have Sankara in
Burkina Faso.
Exactly, Burkina Faso. I mean, that is a really amazing example. Mm-hmm. What he achieved in Burkina Faso in those few years was incredible, and I would look to that as more of a victory for African people, because it was actually led by African people. The problem is, unlike Castro, he was assassinated. He was taken out. So every time we've had an example of one of our brothers and sisters haven't even got the chance to get there, we've had it removed, taken away. So we don't have these examples because we're never allowed these examples. And that is a really interesting point as well. Castro is great, and I have a lot of admiration for a lot of what he's done. He lived to a ripe old age in a way that many revolutionaries don't. I mean, even Che Guevara was assassinated, he was killed. But so that's another issue. He was somebody that was allowed to live on. I mean, Chavez was killed for what he was doing in Gaddafi, even, what's his name in Iraq, so, yeah, I'm saying, so, and he, this was a problematic man as well, there's very few examples of where we've actually seen leaders carry on. I mean, I know we had a panel discussion about Zimbabwe and about Mugabe. I mean, he perhaps is one of the few African leaders that's been allowed to continue, but I mean, as much as we can, support Mugabe, there's a lot that's quite wrong about what's happening in Zimbabwe. That's a two-edged sword. So I would say it's not an idealistic position, it's a position based on the realities that every time we've had a leader, someone to look up to, someone that they've been taken out. I mean, Zephaniah Motopeng of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Tanzania, he came out of prison, died quite quickly. We had Steve Biko, Black Consciousness Movement, killed. I mean, every single leader. I'm a Pan-Africanist, going back to from the PAC, from Azania, that's where I kind of got my politics. And I do understand, or overstand rather, the connection between scientific socialism, Pan-Africanism and communism. And so there is a connection as a Pan-Africanist as well, to recognise there are gains or there are positive things from a kind of, one would say, a communist-based philosophy, but it has to be an African sculpted one, if I want to call it that. Yeah?
Yes, please. If I may. Because when you asked the question, I thought to myself, what an erudite question. And I just couldn't wait to get my teeth around that question. I want to start by suggesting what it doesn't look like. And what it doesn't look like is losing your 526 African organizations. It doesn't look like that.
That's a good start.
What it doesn't look like is your leaders being killed. Carlos Moore himself had to find refuge in the Guinea embassy because the Cuban government was after him because he was challenging this issue of racism. I tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like losing your spiritual system and having that shut down and having your music being deemed imperialist music because it comes from your brothers and sisters in the United States of America. That's what it doesn't look like. But I want to suggest that what it does look like is having the control of the levers of power. I want to suggest that what it does look like is having a redistribution of wealth and being in charge of that process of redistributing wealth. I tell you what it does look like. Having the power to impose reparations. Did Castro and his government raise the issue of reparations? They have the power to say, you know what, these Africans who are the majority of this population have been beaten down, have been brutalized, have been viciously and savagely exploited and barbarized by his father, Castro's father, was a plantation, a sugar plantation owner in a place called Oriente. The majority population of which is an African population. He's one of those people who suck the blood of African people. Castro is a beneficiary of that. His father's exploitation of our ancestors. Fidel Castro knew that. Yes? So that's what it doesn't look like. And what it does look like is African people having the power, the levers of government in our control, and having the wealth of the nation in our control. Tendai MWARI.
Okay, we're going to have 15 minutes where our panelists can ask each other questions, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. So who would like to ask your fellow panelists a question? If you don't, we can just...
I would like to ask Brother Bandaka about the statistics. Sorry, I'd like to ask you about some of the statistics you came up with, the information about the banning of the African organisations and the spirituality, even the background about Castro, because it was interesting. Maybe I didn't look far enough, but there's some information that I'd never heard today, and I'm always fascinated by that.
Tendai MWARI. Well, much of the information about the Cuban government's banning of African institutions and African traditions comes from Carlos Moore, who actually visited this country some years ago in the 1980s. I had the honor of meeting him, and that was the first time I was hearing this information. He's written a book called Pishan. There's information about it on the net, yeah? And the information about Castro's father is on the net. Biographies of Castro is on the internet, where you can read about his background, his father, and what his father did. His father was pretty wealthy. He's pretty wealthy from exploiting our ancestors. Yeah, I don't know if Castro told the people of Cuba that, but you had to search deep, deep to find it myself. Castro should have told us that.
He's wealthy, but I didn't realise where it came from.
Yes, well, anybody who's wealthy in Cuba is benefiting from the legacy of slavery. And Castro should have been straight and honest enough to tell us that. So my father was naughty. I love him, he's my daddy. Yes. But he was naughty. Reparations. And reparations are due. Yeah. He could have done that. He was a president for 50 years. Yeah. That's a long time. Tendai MWARI.
Okay.
And now the brother take over. The brother can do that to Raul.
By the way, Castro confiscated the land his father owned, so he did redistribute it anyway.
Did he give it to African people?
Yeah, we gave it to the masses of people.
He gave it to Cubans.
Yeah, because he's a Cuban. I think there is a. We can't be idealistic. I think it is idealistic. It's a country that's run by white people. Yes, it's a white country in terms of its colonial recent history, and it's idealistic to think that it could be. It's not an African nation in that sense. So I think some of those points are idealistic. But the question I'd like to ask is Cuba's contribution to the Grenadian Revolution, Cuba's contribution to South Africa, Cuba's contribution to Namibia.
Good question.
What's the question?
Cuba's contribution to Angola. that they, how can we deny that these are victories for African people?
Good question.
Sending thousands of soldiers to help liberate our people in those countries. How is that not a victory for African people?
It's a very good question.
Answer that one.
Serious question.
Tendai MWARI. Let me start with this.
Go on.
After the battle of of Cuba's presence in the Congo, and I said the battle, Sister Isis touched on the Congo situation. There was a lot of tension between the Cuban troops and the Congo, the Africans in the Congo, because there was a presumption that the Africans didn't know how to organize. The Africans did not know how to militarize. There was a presumption, yes, and that created a tension. Okay, there was let's take Grenada. When the conflict occurred and the split happened in the Grenadian government, it was Cuba that Maurice Bishop turned to for intervention, and the Cuban government refused to intervene. He wasn't asking him to send troops into Grenada. He was just asking him to intervene diplomatically,
Mediation.
and mediate and help the process. And the Cuban government turned its back on Maurice Bishop. Maybe if the Cuban government had responded in that situation, maybe Maurice Bishop would be alive today. Maybe the Cuban Revolution would have been saved. Was the Cuban Revolution perceived as a threat? Sorry, the Grenadian Revolution perceived by the Cuban government, the Cuban regime, to be a threat to white supremacy in Cuba? Is a question that we must ask. Tendai MWARI. And if you want me to deal with South Africa, I'm happy to deal with the Nigeria alone. I'm happy to deal with all of this.
He mentioned that already.
Ask the chair to give me special dispensation.
No special dispensation. No special dispensation.
I'm overruled by the chair.
You've dealt with it. So we're going to now open it up.
Tendai MWARI, thank you for watching this video. We do hope you found it edifying and purposeful. Please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit us at our website, alkebu-lan.org. Tendai MWARI.